ready for this. Today we're going deep, really deep into the world of farming.
Farming.
Yeah, but not just like, those pretty pictures of fields and stuff.
Right, right.
We're talking about how all that food production, all that farming, it's really impacting, shaping our environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's huge, the scale of it all, like seriously mind-blowing.
It really is. It's a system, a system we interact with every day.
Every day, yeah.
But most people, they don't even realize how massive it is, the scope.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just think about this for a sec. Agriculture takes up a full third of Earth's landmass.
The huge footprint.
Wow, a third. I mean, I knew it was big, but that really puts it...
It puts it in perspective, yeah.
Yeah, and, speaking perspective, that's what these deep dives are all about. So our sources today, we're going to be looking at some excerpts from an IELTS, the International English Language Testing System.
IELTS, right?
Yeah, it's an academic reading sample task, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it focuses on, get this, the role of governments in environmental management. But specifically, we're looking at how that relates to food production.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so we're going to uncover how policies in both wealthy and developing nations, how they can influence, what's happening on farms and ultimately health of our planet.
Exactly. And it's been incredible, The past few decades, we've seen huge increases in food output.
For sure.
But it hasn't been free, you know what I mean? There's been a cost, this intensive use of irrigation,
Oh, yeah.
pesticides, fertilizers, all of that. It has boosted yields, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But is it sustainable? Really? That's the question we have to ask. What about the environment? What's the price?
Big question, right? Like, what is that environmental price tag? What are we talking about here? Like, what are some of the most, significant consequences when we think about modern farming practices?
Well, one of the biggest, you can't ignore it, deforestation.
Yeah.
Clearing land for agriculture, it's the single biggest driver.
Yeah.
Leads to habitat loss, you lose biodiversity, and it even contributes to climate change.
Like a domino effect, right?
A domino effect.
Like we're sacrificing our forests just to have more fields, more farmland.
It's a tough trade-off.
And then you think about, well, there's the issue of water contamination too, right?
Absolutely. That's always in the news.
All the time, all the time.
And it's a big deal. Chemicals from fertilizers, pesticides, they don't just disappear,
Well, they got to go somewhere.
They seep into our water systems, and that's a threat to human health, of course, but also entire ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just a local thing either. These pollutants, they can travel,
Oh, wow.
They go far, polluting waterways, far from where they started.
So it's like what starts on a farm could end up impacting a community miles away.
Exactly. It's all connected.
It shows how interconnected everything is.
It does.
And, our sources, they also mentioned soil erosion. And I'm not going to lie, that sounds kind of scary to me.
It is alarming, yeah. It's these intensive farming practices, and the lack of fallow periods. Yeah, basically giving the land a break, letting it rest, right. All of that. It's stripping away topsoil.
That topsoil is important, right?
Topsoil is essential. It's the lifeblood of agriculture, literally. That nutrient-rich layer, it's where plants grow.
So we're losing that.
We are.
Right.
And when you lose it, land productivity goes down. It means it's harder to grow food in the long run.
It's like we're depleting the foundation.
Yeah, the foundation of our food system.
Of our whole food system, wow. And then there's the whole issue of losing biodiversity, right? That's another big one.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so focused these days on high-yielding varieties,
Like those huge fields of corn, all the same.
Exactly. Massive fields of just one type of grain. And in doing that, we're losing crop diversity.
Why is that bad?
Well, it makes our food supply more vulnerable, to pests, to diseases.
Oh, see.
It's like putting all our eggs in one basket.
Makes sense.
We lose that natural resilience that comes from having a variety of crops.
So spread things out, mix it up. The statistics are kind of scary when you look at this stuff. Back in 1982, the U.S., they found out that a fifth of their farmland was losing topsoil.
Really?
Yeah, at a crazy rate. Now they've done some things to try and fix it.
Oh, good.
Like they're converting some cropland back to meadow or forest.
Interesting.
But here's the thing. Topsoil's vanishing even faster in India and China.
Wow.
So it's not just a U.S. problem, it's global.
It is a global issue. And, government policies, they play a huge role in all of this.
Well, yeah, they can kind of shape what happens on farms.
They have the power to, for better or worse.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because, we think of government subsidies as a way to help farmers, right?
Yeah, to give them a boost.
A helping hand. But our sources are suggesting that it's not always that simple. You know what I mean?
Right. There can be unintended consequences.
Yeah, like a double-edged sword kind of thing.
Exactly. In wealthy nations, a lot of times these subsidies, they're designed to, get the most output per acre.
Maximize.
Exactly. Farmers are encouraged to use more fertilizer, more pesticides, all to boost production.
But that's what we were just talking about, all those problems, right?
Yeah, and as we've seen, there's a big cost to the environment when you do that.
And we're not talking about, chump change here.
No.
This is big money, serious cash. Our sources said wealthy nations spend something like $250 billion every year.
$250 billion?
A year. On these subsidies. I mean, think about it. That's more than all the World Bank lending back in the 1980s.
That's a staggering amount.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if that money could be used differently.
Oh, for sure.
To promote, more sustainable farming.
Yeah, like what if we incentivize the good stuff,
Exactly. Like look at Denmark, the Netherlands. They had these subsidies that led to a huge increase in fertilizer and pesticide use.
And that happened.
Well, yields went up, on paper at least, but the environmental costs, those were hidden.
Oh, so it looked good, but
it wasn't the whole picture.
It wasn't the whole picture, wow. So it's a tricky thing, right? Balancing all this?
It is a tough balance.
But are there any countries that are doing it right? Like, are there any examples of, countries that are shifting to more sustainable practices?
There are, actually. New Zealand, back in 1984, they made a big move, a bold move.
What'd they do?
They got rid of most farm subsidies.
Wow, just like that.
Pretty much.
That's a big change. What made them do that?
Well, they wanted, a more sustainable agricultural sector.
Makes sense.
Economically and environmentally.
Yeah.
And the results were pretty amazing. Fertilizer use went down, way down. They stopped clearing so much land, overstocking went down, and farmers, they started diversifying, their crops, moving away from those monocultures we talked about.
That's really encouraging.
It is.
Like it shows you change is possible.
It is.
Even on a big scale.
Yeah.
But it wasn't all perfect, was it? There must have been some hiccups along the way.
There were some unintended consequences, yeah.
Like,
well, when they got rid of subsidies for soil erosion management, erosion actually went up in some places.
So it's like, even with good intentions,
it's complicated.
It can backfire.
It can. It shows you how complex this stuff is, you
Yeah.
know? And how even policies that are meant to be helpful, they can have unexpected results.
So there's no easy fix, no magic bullet.
No magic bullet, no.
Okay, well, what about developing nations? I mean, they're facing different challenges, right?
Yeah.
Trying to balance, feeding their people and protecting the environment.
They do face unique pressures, that's for sure. And subsidies for things like pesticides and fertilizers, they're meant to help, but they can actually lead to overuse.
Overuse.
Yeah, farmers end up using more than they need to get a good yield.
So it's like more is not always better.
Exactly.
Interesting. So what happens when they use too much? What are the consequences?
One big concern is what we call the chemical treadmill.
The chemical treadmill. That sounds intense.
It is. Basically, pests, weeds, they can build up a resistance
To the
chemicals, yeah. So farmers have to use even stronger chemicals the next year.
So it's like an arms race.
It is.
Against nature.
And nature's pretty good at adapting.
Yeah. Nature always wins in the end, right?
It often does.
So we can't keep relying on these chemical solutions forever. It's not sustainable.
Not in the long run, no.
Are there any other downsides to this, overuse of chemicals?
There are, and they're serious. There's a human cost to all of this, It's estimated that around 10,000 people die every year from pesticide poisoning.
10,000 people.
And most of those deaths, they happen in developing countries.
That's awful. That's really sad.
It is. It brings home the human side of this issue, It's not just about abstract environmental impacts. It's about real people's lives.
It's about people, their health, their livelihoods.
Exactly.
And to really get the whole picture, we have to zoom out, look at the global context.
Right, the bigger picture.
Yeah. And our sources, they touched on this thing called the Uruguay round of trade negotiations.
Okay.
And they were trying to reduce farm subsidies globally.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that has big implications for how we produce food, where we produce food, and what it does to the environment.
Definitely adds another layer of complexity.
Yeah, for sure. So what happens when we change the rules of the game like that? On such a massive scale?
Yeah.
Like, what are the ripple effects?
Well, one possibility is that food production shifts,
Shift how?
From heavily subsidized regions like parts of Europe and North America
Okay.
to areas with fewer subsidies, like developing nations.
So it's like the production moves?
It could move, yeah.
And what would that do?
No, some people worry about that, you know, because it could lead to more pressure to convert natural habitats into farmland.
Oh, so like cutting down more forests, more loss of biodiversity.
Exactly.
But there's also a potential upside, right?
There is. There is. When you reduce subsidies in the developed world, you could see less intensive farming.
Less intense, meaning?
Meaning less chemicals, which is good for the environment, obviously. And it could encourage farmers to grow crops in places that are better suited for them.
Oh, so the right crops in the right places.
Yeah, and that could mean more efficiency, less reliance on things like irrigation and fertilizers.
Okay, so it's not all bad news.
Not at all. It's a complex situation, you know? Lots of moving parts. But it shows the need for careful planning.
Oh, for sure.
International cooperation, you know, to make sure that any shifts in food production happen in a way that minimizes environmental damage.
It's a global issue, so we need a global response.
We do.
It's a reminder that our actions here, they have ripple effects. You know, they go beyond our borders.
They do.
But before we go too far down that global rabbit hole,
right,
let's bring it back down to earth for a second.
Back to the individual.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to get overwhelmed by all this.
It is.
The scale of these challenges.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it comes down to, you know, what we do, our choices, our actions.
I agree. Our sources really emphasize that too.
So what can our listener do? You know, someone sitting at home right now, like, how can they make a difference?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll definitely delve into more as we go deeper.
Okay, looking forward to that.
But for now, I think the most important thing is to be mindful, you know? Think about what you're buying when you're at the grocery store.
So be a conscious consumer.
Exactly.
All right, so we'll leave it there for now. But don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to unpack all of that and more right after this.
So, you know, before the break, we were talking about, well, how our own choices can really make a difference.
Right, our individual choices.
When it comes to, you know, a more sustainable food system.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, I'm curious about that, you know?
Yeah.
It's easy to feel like, well, one person, what can they do?
Right, like you're just one person?
But I have a feeling you might disagree with that.
I do. And I think our sources kind of back that up, too.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, systemic change is super important, that's for sure.
Right, like big picture stuff. Exactly. But individual actions, they matter too, especially when, you know, a lot of people are doing them.
Oh, okay. So it adds up.
It does. It creates this ripple effect.
I like that ripple effect. So where do we start? Like, what can our listener do, you know, in their everyday life to really support this more sustainable food system?
Well, one of the biggest things, honestly, is just being thoughtful about what you buy.
At the grocery store.
Yeah, at the grocery store. Choose foods that are produced, you know, in a way that you feel good about.
So like aligning with your values.
Exactly.
Are there any labels or anything like that that we should be looking for?
Yeah, definitely. Look for things like organic, fair trade, or regenerative.
Oh, yeah. I've seen those.
Those are good indicators, you know, that the food was produced in a way that's good for the soil, good for biodiversity, and, you know, fair for the workers.
Okay, so it's kind of like a shortcut, those labels.
In a way, yeah.
But you know, sometimes that stuff can be pricier.
That's true. Yeah.
Is it realistic to think everyone can afford to buy organic everything?
It's a good point. Sustainable options, sometimes they do cost a little more, but there are ways to eat sustainably without breaking the bank.
Oh, okay. So there are ways around it.
There are.
All right. Give me those budget-friendly tips.
All right. Well, first of all, prioritize whole foods, unprocessed stuff.
So like what kind of things are we talking about?
Fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, things like that.
Okay, so the basics.
Yeah, the basics. They're usually cheaper than processed foods, and they have a lower environmental impact.
That makes sense. It's funny you should say that because I've been trying to eat more plant-based meals.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for my health and for the environment.
It's a win-win.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many delicious meals you can make with, you know, just a few simple ingredients.
Exactly. And if you do buy animal products, try to get them from local farms.
Local, okay.
Yeah, farms that, you know, treat their animals well and care about the environment.
How do you find those farms?
Farmers markets are great, you know.
Yeah, farmers market.
Or those community-supported agriculture programs, CSAs.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about those.
They're great.
What are they? How do they work?
Well, you basically sign up, and then you get a box of fresh produce every week, all from a local farm.
Oh, that's cool.
It's a great way to support local farmers.
Yeah, and eat fresh.
Exactly. And speaking of fresh, buying in season is another good tip.
Oh, yeah, like seasonal produce.
When you buy stuff that's in season, it doesn't have to travel this far, so less emissions from transportation.
Plus, seasonal food just tastes better.
It does. Yeah.
There's nothing like a ripe tomato in the summertime.
Nothing better.
So we've got conscious shopping, supporting local. Is there anything else we can do to kind of minimize our, what do you call it, food footprint?
Well, reducing food waste is a big one.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Did you know about a third of all food produced globally gets wasted?
A third? Really?
That's crazy.
It's a huge amount of resources just thrown away.
Yeah.
It's like we're producing food just to toss it in the trash.
It's a sad reality.
So how can we be less wasteful?
Well, start by planning, Yeah. Plan your meals, make a grocery list, and only buy what you'll actually use.
Okay, so be prepared.
Yeah, and store your food properly so it doesn't go bad.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
And get creative with leftovers.
I love leftovers. You can do so much with them.
Exactly. Turn last night's dinner into something new.
A whole new meal.
It's all about creativity.
And, don't be afraid to get resourceful.
Yeah.
Like wilting herbs. Make some pesco.
Perfect.
Overripe fruit. Freeze it. Make smoothies.
There are so many ways to use up food.
It's like those old school values,
What do you mean?
Like frugality, not wasting anything.
Oh, yeah.
It's making a comeback.
And for good reason.
It's not just about saving money. It's about respecting the food,
Absolutely. And our sources, they also talked about fair labor practices.
Oh, right. So it's not just about the environment.
It's about the people, too.
Yeah, the people who grow our food, harvest it, process it, they deserve to be treated fairly.
Exactly.
So how can we support them?
Look for fair trade certifications. Those ensure workers are getting paid a living wage and working in safe conditions.
Fair trade. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, support organizations that are fighting for farm worker rights, and push for policies that protect them.
So use our voices, use our wallets.
Yeah, to create a more just food system.
Okay, but it's not all on us, right? Like, we need systemic change too.
We do. We absolutely do. Individual actions are great, but we need governments to step up and create policies that support sustainable agriculture.
So what can governments do? Like, what kind of changes would actually make a difference?
Well, they could start by shifting those subsidies,
The ones we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Take them away from practices that hurt the environment.
Okay.
And give them to farmers who are doing things the right way.
So, like, reward the good stuff.
Yeah. Things like crop rotation, cover cropping, integrating livestock,
Those are all good things, right?
They are. They help the soil, prevent erosion, boost biodiversity, make farms more resilient to climate change.
It's like a totally different way of thinking about agriculture.
It is.
Moving away from that industrial model to something more holistic.
More regenerative, yeah.
Regenerative, I like that word.
Yeah.
And governments can also, invest in research.
Oh, yeah. Research and development is huge.
To find new ways to do things sustainably.
Exactly. Like developing crops that can handle drought, figuring out better ways to manage water, finding ways to reduce food waste.
So it's like we need a whole new agricultural revolution.
I think we do.
One that's built on sustainability, resilience.
And I think it's not just about technology, it's about changing our mindset, how we think about food.
What do you mean?
Well, we got to stop thinking of food as just a commodity.
Oh, I see.
It's more than that. It's essential for life.
It connects us to so many things.
It does, to the land, to our communities, to our culture.
It's about enjoying food. Joy of cooking, sharing a meal with people you love, knowing where your food came from.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really eye-opening, I got to say.
Glad to hear.
I'm feeling inspired, to make some changes myself.
That's great.
And to speak up, advocate for a better food system.
That's what we need.
We've covered a lot, but I want to loop back to something we talked about earlier, before the break.
Okay, what's that?
Remember when we were talking about those potential consequences of reducing farm subsidies globally?
Yeah, the global picture.
And how it could lead to, more land being converted to farmland, maybe in places that are really important for biodiversity.
Right, a potential downside.
So, what's the solution? How can we make sure that that doesn't happen? That we don't end up doing more harm than good?
It's a tough one, for sure. But I think it comes down to, two main things. International cooperation.
Okay.
And careful planning.
We got to work together, basically.
Yeah, we do. No more siloed approaches, We need a global food system that works for everyone and for the planet.
That's sustainable and productive.
Exactly. And we need rules, incentives that promote sustainability.
Across the board.
Yeah. And those rules, they got to be based on science, local knowledge, and respect for the environment.
It's a tall order.
It is, but I'm hopeful.
I am too. I think people are starting to get it.
What do you mean?
Like how connected all of this is.
Oh, yeah, the interconnectedness.
Yeah.
That's a good sign.
It's like we're all realizing we're all in this together.
We are, and that's the first step,
To a better future.
To a better future for food and for the planet.
Yeah. It is complex, but it's hopeful too, right?
It is.
Like hearing about those solutions and those shifts that are happening.
Yeah.
Gives me hope,
Yeah.
It's not all doom and gloom.
No, not at all.
It's about creating a better future.
Exactly.
For food, for the planet, for all of us.
And it's a future we can all be a part of.
That's right. And we've talked about, individual choices. We talked about policies, international collaboration.
Yeah, it takes a lot of different approaches.
For sure. It's a big challenge. But, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring it back to our listener for a second.
Yeah.
If they could take away like just one key insight from everything we've talked about,
okay,
what would you want that to be?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing is to remember that our food choices, they have consequences.
Yeah.
And those consequences, they reach far beyond our own plates.
Okay, so it's bigger than just us.
It is. It impacts the environment, of course, but also the lives of farmers and workers.
Right, the people who are actually producing our food.
Yeah, and it affects the health and well-being of people all over the world.
Like, boom, it's all connected.
Exactly. And once we understand those connections,
yeah,
we can make better choices.
More informed choices, more responsible choices.
Choices that align with our values, Yeah.
And contribute to a better food system.
A more sustainable system, a more just system.
It's empowering to think that we're not just passive consumers.
Right. We have power.
We have agency.
We can make a difference.
And all of that agency multiplied by, millions of people.
It adds up.
It can create real change.
A ripple effect, like we talked about.
That's a powerful thought to end on.
It is.
So as we say goodbye for today, we'll leave our listener with a question. Something to think about.
Okay, I like it.
How can you use your purchasing power, your voice, your actions to support a better food system?
A food system that's good for people and good for the planet.
It's something to chew on, literally and figuratively.
Indeed, it is. And until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep making those conscious choices.
Well said. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of farming, food, and the environment. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.